Let's ring in the new year 5777, a year of health, happiness, and good luck for Marty Levinson.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson, and welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson, and you don't want me anywhere near your hair.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go?
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host, Avi Meyers.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Meyers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Dial us up on the web at www.ntnm.org. CommunityPolicingCaps24.org. 2 new officers are being added to each of the 23 or 22, whatever it is, police districts in the city. We're hopeful to have the new superintendent on in upcoming shoot. The Holocaust is a subject that always, I'm not exactly going to say it's been near and dear to me, but definitely a part of my life and my family's life. And I really salute the attempts by people to document it as best as they can, especially while there are still people around that were close enough to the situation. I know myself that when I was growing up, almost half the kids in my class, parents, at least one of them was in a concentration camp. He had a number on their arm. Almost none of them really wanted to talk about the experience, but you could kind of tell what they went through just from their not talking about it. It was a different kind of world, and as we get further and so I've been exposed to that since I was 5 or 6. But as we get further and further away from the world, it's important for people to document what's going on. And something that may not be the usual conventional way, but of course the movie Shoah, which was like I think was that a trilogy or a 4-parter or?
Well, it was a film. It was a single film,
right,
but it aired when it played on PBS in 1987. It played in 4 parts over 4 nights, but it was nearly 10 hours in length.
Yeah, and that was a magnificent film achievement beyond belief. And my next guest actually went to the creator of Shoah to find out, what he did, how he did it, and do his own little documentary. And that is 2015 Academy Award Oscar nominee for Best Director in this particular category, Adam Benzine. How are you?
Pleasure to be on the show.
First of all, my pleasure, and congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
And, as we're filming, it'll be shown in Chicagoland. And hopefully it'll be out in Chicagoland at some point in the future also.
Yes, yeah, it will be. People will be able to watch it on demand on HBO Go. So they'll be able to get it on the HBO catch-up service. And this week, whilst I'm in town, yes, we're having a couple of screenings organised by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C.
Which I think is absolutely terrific. Are they sponsoring you throughout the nation?
Somewhat. I mean, we'll have some screenings here in Chicago, a couple of screenings in Miami, and we had a screening earlier this year in Washington, D.C. that was fantastic. So for them, a film like this is really very helpful in getting a new generation of people to understand the Holocaust of European Jews, to learn about that period of time. It represents a new way to get people reinvested in that period of history.
No, it is, and it's especially when told through the eyes of somebody who's one of their contemporaries. For instance, I'm not going to relate to people that age group as well as you are, because you're closer in age to they are to them and closer in experience. I went through my own series of experiences and have different. By the way, it was very hard for me to watch Shoah.
Yeah.
Because I've had nightmares ever since I was a little kid.
And it's not the length that makes it difficult to watch. It's the incredible scope of terrible things that people are describing. I mean, it's
the detail,
the first-hand testimony of the dreadful things that happened to them in the death camps and in the concentration camps. Hours and hours and hours of listening to that testimony is what makes the film hard to watch. It's not the length.
Yeah, there's actually no archival footage in that movie whatsoever.
No, it's all filmed in present-day Poland, where the camps were at that time in the 1970s. So.
And the fact is that for those of you, not that many people know Holocaust survivors anymore, but they are very reluctant to talk about their experience. Generally speaking, European Jews from those days don't want to talk about, themselves or their past. But especially people that have been in the camps, very rarely. It's unusual to be able to have the opportunity to get them to flesh out things like that.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the reasons that Claude Lanzmann's Shoah was so ahead of its time. When he was doing this work in the early 1970s, nobody else was doing this kind of thing. There had been accounts written by people who had been in the death camps and somewhat published in books or newspapers, but many of the people who Claude Lanzmann went and sat and filmed with, they didn't really understand why he wanted to sit and talk to them, and some of them were skeptical because where they had, after the Second World War, tried to tell people about those experiences, people either didn't want to hear or they didn't believe them. They thought, that what was being described, the absolute lack of humanity, was too horrifying. So when this French filmmaker showed up and said, I want you to talk about what you went through, some of them were anxious. For some of the many people that he interviewed that ended up being in the film or in the outtakes of the film, that was the first and only time that they ever sat down on camera and talked about their experiences. And one of the things that's quite shocking, even watching his film today, it came out in 1985, so it's 30 plus years old now, 31 years old now, is that what you see in the film is you see Holocaust survivors as young people. And I think nowadays people are used to the idea of seeing Holocaust survivors in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s with white hair as frail or older people. But when you see Shoah, you see people in their 40s and 50s who still have jobs, who are still working. And it shows you a period whereby the Second World War ended, they survived, and then they went, life resumed. They went back to work. They had jobs, And there isn't a huge amount of video interviews from that period of time.
No, not
from
at
the
all.
1970s, where people were interviewed just, where they might have come out of camps at the age of 18, 19, 20, and then they're, 25, 30 years later, they're 45 to 50 years old.
Well, it took almost a visionary to understand at the time that these things do, even though, the slogans like, never forget and things like that, people do forget.
Yeah, I mean, now there are.
Yeah.
But in the 70s, so it was massively ahead of its time. But what my film kind of shows is the emotional journey that he went through. I mean, this was incredibly taxing work for him on almost every level, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially. He put so much into that. I mean, to spend 12 years making one film, 7 years traveling to 14 countries, interviewing survivors, hunting down Nazis, secretly filming them with hidden cameras. And then when he had some 225 hours of footage, he spent another 5 years editing it into this. It was a huge strain on him.
I was curious because, like I said, I was reading the IMDb. I don't know. I didn't say this on the. I was reading it as much as I could on IMDb yesterday about it. Those in the movie Shoah itself, those are audio only. But does he actually have their faces? Did he actually turn any of these people?
I mean, it's not audio only. There's a lot of video interviews with people.
Yeah. No, but I mean specifically in the case of the Nazis.
Oh, in the Nazis, yeah. Well, he had a pioneering hidden camera, which was hidden inside a bag that broadcast wirelessly to a van where they were recording it. I mean, it would seem, very hokey nowadays to have a giant bag with a camera lens hidden inside it. But at the time, it was cutting-edge technology.
Yeah, it's brilliant, actually.
He wore a hidden microphone behind his tie, a little bit like this one here. Yeah. And, yes, I mean, he recorded their audio and he recorded a kind of grainy video with them, but you do get to see their faces and you get to see them boast about the kind of songs that they sang in the death camps, and they talk about the mechanics of the death camps. Such as Treblinka and Sobibor. I mean, it's really remarkable footage,
Now, what got you interested in this topic in the first place?
Well, I had started reading about his life. My background is as a journalist, having written about film and television. And he had a really astonishing life. Apart from the fact that he spent 12 years making this film, his masterpiece, he was also a lover of the famous French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. He was friends with Jean-Paul Sartre.
Wow.
He was very much a part of this existentialist French left-bank society. One of the things you get to see in my film is you see footage of him with de Beauvoir and Sartre, shot in the 1960s. I was very lucky to track down that footage. So he was a very interesting character. I mean, he himself fought in the resistance in France as a teenager. When he was 17 and a half, he helped the resistance. So, you know, he was a Jew living in France during the Second World War. So the Holocaust isn't an abstract concept to him. So for him to make this film, you know, he just had this tremendously interesting life. And I really felt that it was important to sit with him and talk about his life before he passed away, because I felt that he was an historical figure of some significant merit.
I agree.
And that there should be a film about him before he passes away. I mean, when I finally convinced him to sit and talk about his life, he was 87 years old. He's now 90 years old. So, you know, this will be the film about him. And I'm just very honoured that he agreed to sit and talk about his life, you know. And his work and the issues that Shoah touched on are so important, especially with what's happening in America today.
There's no question about it. People don't realize that things, they start slowly and slowly. You know, for instance, the Russian Revolution in 1918, there were 25,000 Bolsheviks that got the entire country to revolt. The percentage of people that voted for the Nazi Party that really were Nazis in the 30s, when Hitler got elected, was less than 20%.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a significant number of people to start a movement one way or another if they're really committed to their movement. And it's something that has to be watched and guarded. And, you know, you have to be very careful that you're not, you know, walking in that direction or starting to get in that direction.
Yes. And I mean, as an historian who's, you know, been looking at the Holocaust and the rise of Hitler over the last 2 years, I mean, it's incredibly troubling what's happening in the United States.
I agree.
It's not just that the rise of President-elect Trump, you know, mirrors or echoes the rise of Hitler. It almost exactly mirrors it. You know, Adolf Hitler was a strong man who talked about making Germany great again. He talked about setting up a deportation task force. He said, you know, we're going to have a complete and total shutdown of Jews entering the country until our leaders can figure out what the hell is going on. You know, and if you convert that to exactly what President-elect Trump has done on his rise to fame, I mean, you know, you have him tweeting pictures of Hillary Clinton with a pile of money behind her and the Star of David. It's tremendously worrying, I think.
I'm not a fan of his. You know, it's interesting because the first time I ever felt the kind of fear, you know, that this could happen in this... Well, first of all, I've always understood that this could happen in this country because I am a student of history. And since it's happened in so many countries over the course of time, you know, God was good to us and gave us a break for X number of decades. But, you know, things don't always work that way. But when Obama was elected in 2008, and I know this is a strange comparison, but these are going to start to mount. The number of people... Now, I knew enough about his background being from here to know that he had absolutely no major achievements whatsoever. He was a wonderful talker without achievements. And people were voting for the language. Now, Hitler, like him or lump him, was a brilliant speaker.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the two best speeches I ever heard in person were at the 1972 Democratic Convention, given by two people from radically opposite sides who were both haters, one being Jesse Jackson and the other being George Wallace. And they could talk, they could manipulate, they could make their point, they could make you want to get out of your seat. And there is increasing evidence as they're going through vote totals that a large number of counties that went for Obama twice also voted for Trump afterwards.
Yes.
These are people that are easily swayable, and that's the danger.
Yes, and I think that the thing is, you know, when you look at the late 1920s, early 30s in Germany, they weren't bad people, the people who voted for National Socialist Party. They weren't evil people. You know, you have a lot of Democrats now who are saying, you know, Trump supporters all of them must be racist. And of course, that's not the case. I mean, you know, a lot of the people who voted for Trump in this election are the people who twice voted for a black guy whose middle name is the same.
Exactly.
So it's not that they're racist, but what is troubling is that the exact same circumstances that led to the rise of the National Socialist Party were that people in Germany were absolutely upset with the economy. They felt that they had been completely ignored in society, and they, you know, felt that at that time, Germans had been completely crippled with the debt that they'd been left with after the First World War, and they felt that they were getting left behind, and they were prepared to put up with somebody who was using extremely racist language and scapegoating of minorities. If he was going to fix the economy, if he was going to fix the country, then they were prepared for that. And that's what I think is worrying here. It's that I don't think it's that, many Americans are necessarily racist, but they're happy to elect somebody who is racist if it means that their issues are going to be dealt with.
I happen to agree with you, and the thing is, especially now with the media being what it is, it's so easy to convince people.
Yeah.
When I hear people, I actually wrote in a candidate. I did not like either candidate. Yeah. I did not vote for either one of those two. And I hit all the Trump people are telling me, well, that's a vote for Hillary. All the Hillary people are telling me it's a vote for Trump. No, it was a vote for John Kasich, who's a reasonable human being, who actually kind of wanted to unite the country. But the point is that when I'd hear their arguments, they weren't giving me logical arguments based on where the candidate stood or where the country stood economically in any way, shape, or form. They were parroting the TV commercials. They were parroting these 30 seconds of sound bites that had some truth and some lie. I mean, I'm not saying anything good about Trump, nor will I ever. Well, maybe once I'll say, when they say he used to be president, that would be a good thing. But,
it's certainly unusual to have an election with two candidates who both have such high unfavorables. I would just say as an historian, my concern here really is, I think the difference between Donald Trump and the other candidates that you've seen in the past 2 decades, and I'd say on both sides, including George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, John McCain, President Obama, John Kerry, is that Donald Trump fundamentally doesn't respect the Constitution. He says he wants to overturn the First Amendment when it comes to newspapers so that he can sue them for libel laws. He wants to deport Hispanic Americans who are the children of illegal immigrants, which I find quite stunning, really. The idea that if you were born in Chicago, if you have a birth certificate in Chicago, if you have an
You're a citizen of the United States.
You have an American passport. If you run a business in Chicago and you employ 1,000 people in Chicago, but your parents arrived here illegally, the idea that Donald Trump would set up a deportation task force and he would take your American passport and rip it up, take your Chicago birth certificate, rip it up, and deport you to wherever it was that your parents came from. I think that that's fundamentally un-American.
I agree.
So whilst I think that there are policy differences, of course, between the parties at all different times, I do look at the rhetoric that President-elect Trump has been using, or banning somebody of a certain religion from flying in and out of the country, whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, Catholic, Mormon, to say that we're going to take one religious group and we're going to stop them being able to fly in and out of the country.
No, there's no question he's dangerous, and I can't understand. Of these 16 Republicans that ran for president, I felt that 14 were people that, even if I didn't agree with them 100% or even close, were people at least who could be lived with, who understood how things worked, who would at least work for their side, that had a certain amount of capability. And of course, we came down to the only two on my list that I didn't want any part of, which...
Here's what I think has to happen in America in the coming months that's going to be really important on a community level, on a local level. If you are a Jewish American and you see Muslim Americans being spat at or shouted at or told to go home, you've got to go and stand by their side and say, this is not acceptable. If you're a Muslim American and you see Jewish Americans getting shouted at, being subject to white supremacists, or you see people painting SWAT stickers on the walls, you've got to say that this is not acceptable. I think that America really has to hold together and be united at this time. I think it's a really threatening moment for the Republic.
I agree. And do you want to go another 9 minutes and do a whole show, or do you want me to cut it here?
We can. I'm happy to talk.
Okay, let's talk.
Do another 9 minutes,
Okay, you got it.
I think, going back to my film a little bit.
Yeah. Please, I would, that would be a good idea.
No worries. I think that one of the things that people like about this film is that you're starting to see second-generation Holocaust stories. My film is about a man who documented the Holocaust. You're also seeing films like Denial with Rachel Weisz about a libel battle over a Holocaust denier who tried to sue her. And you see there was a film, Son of Saul, which also came out this year, a Hungarian film about Sonderkommandos. So you're starting to see films now that approach the Holocaust as second-generation stories. And I think that can be a really good way of keeping education on this topic alive, you know.
No, I think it's important, and it also has to be able to be, well, you want to stay true to the original story, but it has to be relatable, the same way that, you know, the way I've understood it, I wouldn't try to begin to relate to a younger crowd, because, actually I'm a pretty good storyteller, so maybe I'd get away with it, but most people wouldn't. It's important that people understand in terms that they know, what's what and who's who. We were talking about commercials before. I was mentioning that, and we'll get back to your film. It's so easy. You know, it's amazing to me how many people think that a 5'6", 110-pound woman could beat up a 6'4", 250-pound man at will if she's trained properly, because you're watching that stuff on TV. So you see it happen all the time, but I still haven't seen a Major League Baseball player who's a woman, but that's another subject. Back to the movie. Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. I just wanted to get that one last thing in. So, how long does the movie actually run?
It runs for 40 minutes.
Okay.
People can watch it on HBO Go. They don't need to have seen Claude Lanzmann show.
We don't have to wrap up now.
Yeah.
But no, not at all. We're going to go to 28:30. Okay.
Great.
So, in terms of how many hours of film did you actually? How much film did you have to get down to that 40 minutes?
Well, I mean, the amount of interview that we did with Claude Lanzmann was not a huge amount. We had 6 hours with him in Paris. I hired a hotel room and we filmed in there, much like a setup that we have here. Yeah. Lights, 2 cameras set up, and I sat for 6 hours and talked to him over the period of a week, which was quite physically tiring for him. I mean, he was 87 years old, so we had to break off.
6 hours at a time is, it's considerable.
I mean, just even sitting and talking to somebody for multiple hours very quickly tires you out. It's a lot more exhausting than you think. So day after day, we would be talking to him about this, and that was quite physically tiring for him. And then I worked with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. To use the outtake footage that he filmed in the 1970s.
Oh, nice.
To tell his own story. And so what we were looking at there was footage that he featured in, where he was behind the camera, or where you'd see him sitting and talking with survivors, or where he might be in a shot talking with the former SS officers. And I think that one of the things that people relate to in the film, and one of the things that people find makes it feel like a powerful film, is seeing Claude Lanzmann at the age of 87 as this old man reflecting on his life, and then jumping back with the archive footage and seeing him at the age of 47, 40 years earlier, and seeing that juxtaposition between him now as an old man and him in the prime of his life doing this incredible work.
That is interesting.
Yeah. It makes you reflect a lot on the passage of time. At one point you see him as a 17-year-old, a photo of him as a young resistance fighter, and then you see him as a 47-year-old, and then you see him as an 87-year-old. So you have 70 years of history encapsulated.
That's cool. That's very cool. No question about it. So it was basically one 6-hour session?
Well, it was over the course of a week, yes. So we filmed with him over 3-4 days.
Yeah, does he... did you have any trouble getting him to agree to it?
Yeah, it took some time. He can be a bit curmudgeonly. He's a stubborn old French man.
Yeah.
But I had some friends at the BBC in the United Kingdom who were able to help support me, and wrote a letter which convinced him that this would be a good thing to do. And in the end, he was very generous with his time, I think, and he didn't ask for any money. He didn't ask for any creative control or anything. He agreed to sit and talk.
That's very nice.
I'm very grateful that he did that, and I'm really pleased that we got to make a film about it.
Well, the fact that you got an Oscar nomination, I think, is proof that he made the right move.
Yeah, the film, I think, is connected with people. I think especially with the Academy, they identify in it, in some ways, the struggles that so many artists face when they're trying to make significant work. A lot of documentary makers who I've spoken to really identify with Claude Lanzmann's story. I mean, his story is an extreme story. 12 years to make one incredible film. But many documentaries are very hard to make. even this short documentary took me 4 years to make. Money is very hard to raise for documentary filmmaking, and it can take a very long time. So I think that they really identified with the universal artistic struggle that you see in the film.
No, that's important. It's interesting. You brought me back to I went to Columbia College over here, and they've got they really built the film department beautifully after a very small beginning. But sometimes I could be walking into school and be walking by a bridge, and I could see a body falling. And of course, it was the film students with the dummy.
With mannequins.
Yeah.
I wondered where that story was going for a minute. It sounded a little dark. Daily suicides on the walk to work.
No, it wasn't quite
filming
that
with
bad,
mannequins
but,
off the bridge.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it took. There was actually a guy who was a very little noted cameraman. Got dedicated to the idea of teaching people how to make movies. And brought in all these professionals and really did now it's a well-noted department. Do you have any training in film, or this is really your first?
No, my background's as a journalist, so I felt...
Yeah, same here.
I felt confident as an interviewer.
Yeah.
And as a storyteller, I suppose. I've written long features before.
Yeah.
I'd interviewed a lot of documentary filmmakers, and I'd known that many of them had made their start as a writer, so you didn't necessarily have to go to film school. I think the secret is to surround yourself with very talented people who can do the things that you can't. So I had a director of photography, very talented director of photography, Alex Ordanis, who was in charge of the look of it, and I would describe what I would want it to look like. You work with an editor who helps you sculpt the story, you have a sound recordist, I had a composer who did the music for it. So your role is kind of as the captain of the ship. Make sure that everybody's doing their role for the ship to sail smoothly. It went pretty well, I think. HBO bought the film, and it got Oscar nominated, as you say. And Claude Lanzmann came to the Oscars as my guest in
That's very cool.
in January this year. At the age of 90, he got to walk the red carpet at the Oscars. So
yeah, how did it feel?
Good. It's important that he got to do that because his masterpiece.
For you too.
Well, exciting, very exciting to be at the Oscars. Who goes to the Oscars with their first film?
Nobody.
So, I felt great about that. But it was a great chance for him to get acknowledgement for his role as a master filmmaker. His masterpiece, Shoah, when it came out in 1985, was never nominated for an Oscar. And it's considered among the great Oscar snubs, the films that didn't get nominated.
It's a magnificent film.
Yes. So for him to be able to go this year and 30 years after his film was released to have this moment of acknowledgement, I think was really important and really good. And, it's a way of the Academy acknowledging him, I think, that nomination.
Cool. Now, first of all, I want to thank, I'm going to start the wrap up right now. Selena Reyes from the United States. You're from the Memorial Museum. I'm not saying that 100% right, but Holocaust Memorial Museum. And, Adam Benzine, who, of course, is the interviewer and director, and I guess you're the producer also.
Yeah, I wore a lot of hats.
Right, and you pronounce it, because I'm...
Yes, the film is Claude Lanzmann, Spectres of the Shoah. And if you have HBO Go, you can watch it on demand right now.
And and hopefully you'll be able to do more tours, and the people will get other chances to see the film.
I'm really grateful to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. for bringing me out here to do these screenings. The screening that we had at Beth Al last night was incredible. We had more than 500 people. We're playing tonight at Temple of Shalom, and we're expecting a very big turnout for that too.
Very good. You want to leave any contact information, or people want to contact you?
Online, you can see the film if you go to facebook.com/Lanzmann film, Lanzmann film. On Facebook, you'll find video clips there, lots of information about local screenings, and a lot of information about the film.
And Benzine, thank you very much. I want to wish you all the luck in the world with this project and your future projects. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Sonny Hirsch, my entire technical crew. Bye-bye, everybody.